Hey everybody, first Paradox podcast. Gregg, I'm really appreciating the chance to have you as our first guest on this journey to discuss this, and want to introduce you just a little bit. Mostly want to allow you to introduce yourself because honestly, all I know is you do amazing work in the world and you have a lot of accolades and brilliance and wisdom and knowledge to share. But yeah, would love to give you a little space just to say hello, introduce yourself.
Absolutely. Thank you. Yeah. So I'm a professor in this combined integrated doctoral program at James Madison University. I've been there since 2003. Directed it for 12 years. It's about producing integrated psychological doctors, people that go out and do the mental health work in the field and also become leaders in mental health. And my particular interest is in the relationship between my professional expertise in the relationship between psychology as a discipline, and in particular theoretical psychology. Like, what is that? Does it just exist in theory? But actually I say, no, there actually is a way to take a big view of the theoretical discipline that actually is somewhat coherent, and then link that to the actual integrated approach to practice in psychotherapy. So I built this sort of unified theory into unified approach that actually also then I find connects to larger issues in philosophy and knowledge in general. And so I'm actually now connecting with people who see our current ways of knowing, sort of stemming from modernity and our sort of first enlightenment, and wondering whether or not we might be on the cusp of sort of enlightenment 2.0, as it were, and might be able to then help the system in its trajectory, which I feel a little nervous about at multiple levels, and envision ways in which we might cultivate a trajectory that feeds our soul in a little better process and allows us to connect to the planet and each other in healthier ways.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's thank you for that. And I know one of the things that immediately sort of drew us together was this concept of what we call paradox, or could be referred to as polarity or dialectic approach. And would love if you could share a little bit about like how that relates to your work, or just what your exploration of that has been.
Yeah, so I think that one of the things that you can see in terms of the wisdom of more Eastern traditions is a longer tradition of dialectic, of embodied, say, in the yin yang reality. Of course, Western traditions from Hegel, have appreciated things like this thesis and the antithesis and a potential synthesis. But I see us as undervaluing that polarity kind of dialectic, and overvaluing sort of dimensional knowledge or dichotomized knowledge, both of which are key for our concepts. We need to be able to put concepts on dimensions. We need to sometimes create dichotomies, yes, no, 0, 1. But we also need to realize that an enormous amount of thinking is best conceived in relationship to tensions between, complementarities between, and I embrace that a lot. In fact, in the yellow symbol, it's a yellow flower that actually has a yin-yang symbol inside of it at the big and small level, and it basically creates an idea that a fractal polarity, a dialectic fractal polarity, is apparent in so much of how we should think, or how to make sense out of the world, of what's in the world. So I'm a big fan of thinking in terms of polarities, thinking creatively and exploring those polarities and using those to connect and to make sense out of the world. That's why I'm a big fan of. As soon as I saw your work in Paradox, I was like, oh my God, connecting that and entrepreneurial cutting edge thinkers and letting them, explore this is brilliant. And so big thumbs up there. That's a beautiful idea.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a journey for me and for all of us to even I don't even know if wrap our heads around it is the right word, because it feels like it has to be, first of all, heart and head to speak of that. And also it's so infinite, which is why I personally love it, is that there's no end. It's this dance, or this relationship, relational. And what we're going to be exploring is this sort of paradox or polarity of as you know, right, it's entrepreneurs and entrepreneurial leaders, so there's a lot of desire to figure out or co-create a new paradigm where, as leaders, we can and specific to this paradox, we can lead and provide structure and give direction to our teams, in particular where that's, required in order to have a business that moves forward, cohesively, and also to foster a true sense of community and not have it always be top down, and be able to be our true selves and all the things that come with being a human and not just, a role. So I'd love to just open I know you've done a lot of thinking around this, maybe in different language, but I would love to sort of hear how you think of the polarity of sort of what we've been calling hierarchy and community.
Yeah.
And yeah, we can take from there.
Brilliant. Yeah. So I think this is a real fundamental issue. I'll offer some thoughts, possibly even throw up a diagram here or two. But when so for me, we have a relationship system as part of our architecture. Okay. All right. So what do we mean by that? Well, if you're a parent, you have seen your connection with your kids. The kids are born and they have an attachment system, and the harmony between, say, a parent, mother, offspring, what that dance is very relational. Notice that there's a self-other connection there. And we're really prepared that we're very social primates. James Mark Baldwin said, ego and alter are born together. Okay. Which basically means that as we understand other, like another way of saying it is, your parents before you know yourself. Okay. So you see yourself in others, and so much of then learn to know yourself through that relationship. So the self-other dynamic is really, really powerful. Okay. Very powerful. And it guides a huge amount of what we do in the modern world. Okay. So we're constantly tracking that. Now, if we put self in relationship to other, then we can start to think about, well, what are the problems and how do we navigate them? Okay. So one way of thinking about, well, the problems are sort of like, how do we, sort of guide our investments and connect and get the things done in the world? How do I do that for me? And then at one level, you're an object in the world for me, and sort of like, okay, how am I going to move you? And then, or are we actually going to come together, share our interests? Or what if your interests compete with mine? Okay. And pretty quickly you realize that there's the cooperative path, okay, of relating, whereby we're going to try to say, hey, your interests and my interests are shared in a particular way. Then there's a competitive path. All right. So our interests are in some ways, they may complement in some ways, but then are going to form a rank at some level. All right. And then there's also, we have to figure out, well, how close and involved are we going to be, or how separate we're going to be. Okay. So these are very basic problems that are perennial, meaning they last across evolution. They sit as the fundamental self-other frames that we need to navigate. And you see them. So if you go and you study animal science, animal behavior science, everywhere you see competition and cooperation as two relational frames, okay, that define much of what's self-other. And we're going to see that actually there's, for social creatures, meaning creatures that have relation over time, okay, that live, say, in a tribe and have an ongoing relation, don't just have predator-prey kinds of things, but actually have mother-offspring, tribal relations. Then you see a tension between competition and cooperation. Okay. Yeah. Almost like a polarity. Okay. And then you like, okay, well, if you have that as a foundational lens about our nature, then we ask this question of hierarchy and communion, right? And immediately you'll start to say, okay, the way we start to structure ourselves. Okay, notice I'm doing vertically here. I've sort of an intuitive sense of vertical, and then I have an intuitive sense of horizontal. Okay, we're going to then wonder if that actually can undergird or potentially frame some of the nature of this polarity and how it shows up in everyday life.
Yeah, I love that. Like, thank you. That's super illuminating for me, the sort of underlying dynamics from just a fundamental behavioral level of how are we navigating who we are and how we're relating to others. And these sort of, seems like cooperation and competition is almost like a underlying polarity that's also present with the more community or the like collective polarity of hierarchy and community. One thing you mentioned that I would love to learn a little more is when you said competition, you were saying that there's like a hierarchy, or that wasn't exactly your word, but I'm curious. So like for an entrepreneur, right, or for like a company, right, it's like this really interesting mix because everyone is choosing to be there for some shared purpose, and some of it must be mostly self-interest and financial. But anyway, there's still like in this case, for startups, usually it's a lot of alignment on the mission. So there's this like cooperative, or there's this at least like shared, there's like this macro cooperation, right? We all want to cooperate. And then there's within that, there's all these, little, what would be called probably in that way, like competitions, or like at least like competing ideas about how do we do that, or who should be doing that. And so it's fascinating. So I'd love to hear a little more about, how you see competition and structure relating.
Right. You're raising, once you then start, well, where is this and at what level are these things operating? And then you realize, wow, there's all these nested kind of potentials and the nice thing about thinking about it in terms of a paradox of polarity, you're going to see actually these things pop up all the time. In other words, you're going to want to think about sort of cooperation, competition, power, and love is another kind of term for this. And they're going to be like fractals. They'll be like in all sorts of different kinds of places depending on levels. Okay. So for example, if you're going to be entrepreneurial, you need actually a level of cooperative trust that is as part of a structure. Okay. That actually is, think about it like say football, okay, or any sport. Obviously, to play a sport, it's very competitive, but to enter into the arena and have it be an actual sport is very cooperative, okay? In the sense that we will agree in advance what the rules are, we'll agree what the goals are, we'll agree that there are referees that help us, and we will at some level go along with the rules of the game in a cooperative way, okay? I mean, if all of a sudden, one team started pulling out knives and stabbing the other team, the entire system's gone, okay? Yeah. And then you actually get into the ultimate competition, which is war between systems, okay? So that's when virtually even in war, we'll set the rule in the second, in the 20th century, started building rules of warfare. It's actually even like, well, dropping mustard gas is so unbelievably horrible. Let's even if we're at the fundamental, the ground zero of competition, will actually engage in some cooperation so we don't do that. Okay. Yeah. So cooperation and competition at this level are really ubiquitous frames to be thinking, to understand any kind of relation. You're going to bring those to bear. And then we can shift it. So my wife and I, it's like we've been, we're high school sweethearts. We've been together for a long time. I know it's going to come as a surprise. We sometimes compete over issues of power. No, we sometimes disagree, and we want respect and be appreciated for our view, and we feel devalued by the other person. So I'm sorry if that's a shock.
Never happens to me.
The audience. Okay,
ever,
never.
So.
Right. So once you enter into a relationship, it's just constant harmony. Everyone has pure bliss in relation, and there's no conflict. So it's like, in all sorts of relations, you're going to find.
Sorry to interrupt, but something you said is super interesting to me, just popped in something new to me. Like, I think the thing that's really interesting from an entrepreneur's perspective is that we're often the ones that set the rules. So if there's this game, right? And there's obviously the rules that we can't set, which is the world that we live in, how business money, like how money works and stuff. But within our teams, if we're truly founding something, right, we have some stuff beyond our conscious control maybe, but we have so much power to like set those rules for how things operate in our company. And I wonder, that's really fascinating because I hadn't thought of that, like the idea that we're setting up that, in that sports analogy, we're sort of setting up like, okay, who's the ref, who's the, what are the points? So, and the goals. And I'm curious, I guess I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that and, how thinking about this might help, how thinking about cooperation and competition might help for like, how do we set a culture, which is basically culture, right? How do we like
exactly right? That's right. So so this is the system. So we humans, now that we have propositional language and engage in what we call question answer dynamics, that we build these systems of justification. Okay, and these are the explicit. They can become institutionalized rules, and then we navigate in those contexts through dynamic argument and narrative and dialogue. Okay. So when you decide, hey, this is what my company is, okay, this is its mission, its vision, what you now are saying is, here's my justification for being, okay, and this is the language system or language game or rules of justification that legitimize our patterns of being, okay. And we're going to say, well, here's the product, this is the content that we're going to do, and then there's going to be all sorts of dynamics of structure of process, like what role is everyone going to play, all right, and then what level, and you're going to have to then always manage the dialectical tension of hierarchy and community, okay, because everyone's going to need to know, because all humans, it's a fractal issue, everyone's going to bring their competition cooperative placement, okay, and then they're going to need to know where they fit into that. There's going to have to be some institutional justification, okay, and then there's going to have to be the actual oral relational dynamic of all the actual players involved, which are like, hey, if I'm in your company, you know, you're the founder of this and you brought me in, and now we're going to have a particular kind of dynamic relation. And it's because I'm Gregg and you're Michael, that's going to make it unique. But it's also the case that you'll have an infrastructure, institutional code that says, well, this is what the executive does, you know, and you hired me as a consultant, and then this is your role, and now this is that relation. So there's the formal code relation, and then there's the actual, you know, human to human relation.
Yeah.
That's the stage for all that.
Yeah, that's so fascinating to think about it too. Like, I do think that hierarchy is often the formal code, and then the community is the human to human aspect. So I really love that. One thing that we at Paradox think about is, like, on any polarity, right, or paradox, each side has what we call a light qualities, which are essentially the kind of ways that we want the, you know, community or hierarchy to show up, and then what we call shadow qualities, which is like if it gets out of balance or it's overly weighted in that direction. And I'm curious what your sort of, what your perspective is on what some of the like light qualities of, you know, hierarchy are, and what some of the potential shadow, you know, if it goes over in the hierarchical direction qualities. I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Sure. I mean, so when we think about this institutionally and structurally, you know, people have missed the polarity, the healthy polarity, which is the two positive sides of both of these. Okay. And I'll show you a diagram in a little bit called the influence matrix that really just spells all this out. Okay. It helps you see. But what do I mean that people have idealized various versions of this? With the idealized version of hierarchy, okay, in its pure form that then tries to deny it's a shadow and remove it from cooperation, is fascism. Okay? The fascism is the idea that there's an absolute totalitarian state that's better than you, that gives authority and shines its light of brilliance on you as long as you're an in-group and submit to it. So as long as you're a member of the Nazi Party, then everything outside of that, you then place yourself, you can be a peon and Hitler's up here, okay? But because you shine the light, he shines the light on you, and you have what's called an authoritarian personality, which appreciates authority. You then are willing to submit to that and gain your relational value by virtue of being in the in-group, even though you're low. But your submission to it makes you connected to it, and then your elevation of it connects you further. So you engage in voluntary submission to the authority and feel valued as a function of that. Okay. So that's how you get your identity, by submitting to the power. Okay. And the way you then do it is you then that's the in-group of cooperation and love. And then everybody else, Jews and communists, okay, are horrible entities, and we will then devalue them and destroy them and show that our system is powerful and superior. Okay, that's a quintessential embrace of hierarchy's all good as long as you have the right guy in place, right? And you see how sick that is. But actually,
guy usually has
almost always. Well, actually, yeah. You know, I have to, hopefully the 21st century was the women leadership. That's a whole other dynamic, but it's complicated actually, by the way. We can bring gender into this because there are archetypal reasons that men are going to be moving more into a hierarchy and women will be more oriented to communion. That's another dynamic we can talk about.
We'll go there another session.
But communism fundamentally is the idea that we're going to create equality, okay, and repress hierarchy. But then, of course, then what happens is, in order to repress hierarchy, you have to have power. And what you see in horrible Stalinist Russia is an absolute totalitarian state that tries to manage that. structure. Okay. So if anybody wonders whether the pure representations of hierarchical authority don't have a shadow that you can idealize, well, just look at the 20th century and say, oh my God,
Yeah. Yeah.
these things better be held in some degree of tension, because they, of course, they have horrifying shadows in terms of their purity. And what you generally want to do, okay, is, and this is because of our fractal human nature, is you want to appreciate two fundamental dialectics. Actually, one is the power-love dialectic, okay? And one is an autonomy-dependency dialectic. That is your level of involvement, okay? So extreme autonomy gets you totally distanced, and so then you're not involved at all. Extreme dependency means I'm completely enmeshed and engaged, okay? And then I don't have any individuation. That's one problem. And then another problem is, hey, I want my effective control and rank, and that gets me influence, but I also need to be connected. I don't want to be a dominant team. You know, I'm the best guy in the team, but then so every time I shoot the bucket, you know, I ball hog. Now I'm a problem. Okay. But if I'm really giving and now elevating everybody else, and, you know, it's the end of the game, they want the ball in somebody's hands, like, well, I really care about your feelings, so I'm going to give you the ball. It's like, well, you're going to lose the game then, right? So there's this fundamental capacity to navigate autonomy, dependency, and cooperation, competition, or power and love, to find a sweet spot of maximizing what I call relational value and social influence in the system. And if you maximize relational value and social influence around a power, love, autonomy, dependency, you will have a healthy system. People will feel that. If you split it and create unbalanced dichotomies and conflicts, then people will not feel known and valued.
You know, it's so, like, when you were, that's really, thank you. And when you were talking about the fascist, like someone like submitting to some external authority, like I feel like every part of me being like, absolutely not, I will never do that. And it's interesting because, you know, that's a big part of why I'm an entrepreneur, right? I mean, we could analyze my
totally. No, it's called, there's an authoritarian personality tendency, okay, which basically means, to what extent do you appreciate the vertical, okay, and then want to plug yourself in so that you, and then what you do is you submit to authority and you expect people beneath you to submit to you.
Yeah.
Okay? And many of us, like me, I'm completely anti-authoritarian. Okay. That's why when I'm getting trained in my schooling, I'm always like, they tell me what the standard is, and I'm like, this is bullshit. I'm going to challenge whatever the authority is going to give me. I'm very autonomous. I'm like, no, that's wrong. That's wrong. I can do it better. You know, so it's like, that's my, you know, that's why
I relate at all, you know. No, yeah.
So
well, I think as entrepreneurs, that's like almost like, I don't know any entrepreneurs who don't have a pretty strong streak of that, because otherwise, why would we? It's so much harder. It's so much like more pressure. It's, you know, there's definitely like have to be going against the grain to some extent. And well, it depends on the type of entrepreneur, but specifically the type of entrepreneur who really wants to change things. It's not like it's about creating something new. And those are really the type of entrepreneurs that I'm, you know, connected with the most. And I think, but it's one thing that was super interesting to me is like, I think it's like, it's this really interesting situation that I find myself in. And I know if I'm talking to a lot of other entrepreneurs, which is that we inherently we inherently do want to rebel against authority. And we inherently want to, I think ideally want to create a very communal, a balance, but a very like collective space where everyone is taking their own responsibility for their own behavior and their own contribution to the team. At least I know for myself and a lot of other founders, that's like our ideal. And then when we get into the practice, that if we overly, you know, go that way, not everyone has the same idea. Not everyone interacts with that dialectic the same way. Right? Some people want like, hey, tell me what to do, and other people, they might want the autonomy, but then they don't, like you said, like they don't perform it, or it's like or they go in their own direction and it creates challenges. So there's this like, you know, it's like, I don't want anyone telling me what to do. I would prefer not to tell others what to do in some ways, but in some ways I also am like, well, I can do it the best because I started this thing and I know this stuff. And so, yeah, it's definitely like it's an emotional and like, you know, actual continual challenge to face with that, for sure.
Completely. Absolutely. Actually, why don't I just quickly at least bring up a diagram real fast?
Please.
If you can, I don't know if I'm able to share.
You should be.
Here. I think I can. Okay. So I'm going to flash through this and get to this thing here called the influence matrix. Okay. So the influence matrix, what this does is it maps your underlying structure. Okay. By underlying structure, I mean, this is what you become born more or less in the world with. This is what guides your heart. And I mean that metaphorically, although your heart is connected to but it's your perception and your feelings about being in the world. And this then relates to your perceptions and feelings about being in the relational world, meaning myself in relationship to other. Okay. And what it says is that you actually have guiding templates for that you're trying to move toward and guiding templates you're trying to move away from. Okay. The ideal place that we want to be is to be known and valued by important others. Okay. So there are people that are important to our sphere of influence. And to the extent that they know who we are and value us for who we are, that is an ideal state. Okay. Mm-hmm. To the extent that we are have no influence, okay, and are either not known or not valued, or worse, all three, have no influence, are known in whatever ambiguous sense, and then are rejected and abused, okay, that's the archetypal place of what we want to avoid, okay, and that we're terrified from. And we can think about this in very clear evolutionary terms, okay, we're very social animals, we have to survive, we have to reproduce. If we're known and valued by our clan in a particular way, our opportunities for survival and reproduction are qualitatively different. If our clan decides we're miserable and worthless and rejects us, we're actually a death sentence. Okay. So this is a fundamental, the reason we like to eat rather than be eaten is evolutionary. Okay. Jaws is like we come very prepared. The reason that we think, kids will very immediately feel in kindergarten, they get rejected, they're really wounded by that. That's we're prepared for that, okay? When you wanna be an entrepreneur, what you're wanting to do is you say, you have this great idea, right? Which the world would be a better place. I wanna produce this idea, and to the extent that the world loves me for my idea and invests in me, damn, I'm on top of the world, right? I was like, yep. To the extent that, nope, other people do it better, or you did it lousy, or we don't care about your idea. I was like, that hurts. Okay. So this is a fundamental guide for us. Now then the question is, well, how do we actually navigate these worlds? And this then gets into exactly what I was talking about before, which says, okay, there are actually three different relational process variables. So process variables, how am I positioning self in relationship to other? We can differentiate them from the content. So the content's the task. Okay, you got a project you got to do. All right, that's the content. Now, how are you going to be in relation in the context of this project? Okay, and we therapists pay a lot of attention then to process variables. It's like, okay, the how of the exchange, and this focuses then on the how of the self-other position. There's the vertical dimension. Okay, that is, we're very attentive. Like in 3D space, we we co-opt our spatial mechanisms, and we literally do think about as people above us. Oh, Obama, he's great. He's above me. And that person, he's below me. Okay, that's a very natural way. And we can think about the role of this in terms of dominance and submission. Although I want to be clear that when you're really on the low end, there's a big difference between forced submission and voluntary submission. Okay. Yeah. So if there's some very, very high comes to you and says, hey, Obama comes to you and says, hey, I need you to help, or Biden or whatever, and you're like, and you really like that person, and you say, oh yeah, I want, then you feel great, and I'll submit to somebody who's really powerful and it's when the real low relational value is when somebody actually controls you. Okay. And this is archetypally in like a master-slave relationship. This would be the horrifying position of pure dominance and control. Yeah. But we absolutely set ourselves up for some sort of rank. We have to do it. Parents over children, bosses over employees. We need this. I should also note that there's direct, like that's the role rank that the system gives you. And there's indirect rank where we're comparing ourselves, like how attractive am I oh, hey, I want to go out with this guy because I'm a little more attractive than that guy, but I don't want to go out with Brad Pitt. I mean, I was like, well, maybe I do because he gets enough attention, but so those are the kinds of judgments that we'll be making indirectly, but those are also rank judgments. Okay. Brad Pitt's here, I'm here, blah, okay. It's a totally different ball game. I have to attend to that intuitively. So that's indirect competition versus direct competition, but they're both competitive ranking variables. Okay. Then there's a red line. All right. The negative is the hostile line. That's when our interests diverge. Okay. And we get a signal that this person's hurting our interests in a particular way. And then we'll get frustrated by that. And if that persists, we'll get either contempt or hatred of that person in a particular way. The opposite of that is when we share interests and identity and feel affiliation. Affiliation is the process by which we bring that other person's interests and make it our own. Okay. So that when we say, hey, well, I want my company, I want everybody to be happy here. Okay? You're extending your ego to the company, you're feeling the love, and you're wanting everybody to be valued and have their interests met in a particular way. Okay. And humans are actually very, when they're given safety and they're given protection and they're given care, they're very pro-social creatures. All right. We really, if all things being equal, we want to love the other. Mm-hmm. We will fear for ourselves. And if our self-interest gets activated, we will act accordingly, okay? But we absolutely are oriented to love the other, all things being equal, okay? But loving the other and then our interest in competition will come in tension, all right? Mm-hmm. So the power of love, to achieve high relational value and social influence, you actually need to navigate the power love deal, and the red line and the blue line. And so,
I feel like I'm really curious where the green line is going, but I also just want to say, I feel like the ideal for anyone probably, and I'll speak for myself and also a lot of entrepreneurs I know, is to be able to have power and love, right? And I think that's the underpinning of community and hierarchy, where there is structure, there is power, both in the sense of the individual leader, but also the system is powerful. And then in relation to the world. And then also, of course, love being, I think, the biggest missing ingredient from the business world right now. And it's like, anyway, we could go all into that, but yeah, I think.
That's exactly right. Just the ideal position is to, if you love football, the ideal position is to be Tom Brady and have won the Super Bowl and be holding up the trophy. It's unbelievably hard. You demonstrate your competition and people love you for what you've done. That is the ideal. Okay. So we carry around this ideal. I'm the entrepreneur, I achieved, and then people love me for my achievement. Man, do I feel fundamentally that's totally great. Okay. If you get both of those, you show me people actually feel both of those. Okay. I'll show you somebody with experience, and you're known for it, by the way. You have to both be known and valued. Some people fake it. All right. And then you're an imposter syndrome. And even though they may value you and you might even be successful. All right. You get problems with that. There's a story like Andre Agassi, and he wrote his autobiography, Open. His dad forced him to play tennis for a long time. And although he achieved and got some fan love, he also, until he came to terms with this, he basically felt forced into it and then was faking it. Okay. So that's a whole nother.
I was going to say, there's like a quality of love that like needs to be present regardless of the achievement level. Like we need to love also. And I hear too what you're saying. And I think that's like, I think that's like the lonely at the top thing. Like, I think that comes from the idea that like, it's hard to feel loved when you're in that position of like, the love is not often, it feels like there's the power dynamics take over the love. And it's like to question whether the love is really there if the power weren't there. And also to question like if the love is conditional. So anyway, a lot.
I mean, we capture these things and like, it's better to be feared than loved, right? And you read Machiavelli and you're sort of like, if you care about the company, sometimes you gotta make really hard decisions and screw it. You can't be loved. You're gonna drive the thing forward. And especially in a capitalist, instrumental, efficiency-oriented thing that maximizes bottom line control, guess what? You get a lot of systems that drive you to make those decisions. So you feel this enormous tension of, well, is the system going to grow and be effective? And if so, I got to trim the fat and sometimes light fire under people's asses and be feared rather than loved. Well, okay, but guess what? You've now done a blue line and you sacrificed your lead line, and now you're feeling sense of connection and your own, oh my gosh, what am I? And you're absolutely right. One of the big changes we need to make, capitalism drives influence, but it often sacrifice this felt sense of relational value.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and then what we actually do is we turn people into instruments in the capital labor world.
Yeah.
And all the wisdom traditions know that actually you treat people like instruments as ends as opposed to, as means as opposed to ends.
Yeah.
You're really in danger. And one of our big sicknesses is to figure out how to infuse more love into the capital system. That's one of the great
that's
tips.
what we're here to do. I love that. Yeah. And it's like, right. It's a both. I mean, it's a how does those, I know from my own experience for sure that the absolute best, the times the companies that I've been leading have been most successful and I've felt the best and we've done the best have been when we have both of these, right? And there is love, but it doesn't preclude the hard conversations or the tough decisions, but they're made within that. It never steps out of the love. It's just, it's all held in that love and connection. And, you can call it love.
That's right.
Care, we could call it, humanity, really. Like it's all held in that space. It still happens, but there's never this break. There's never this, okay, we're going to put our humanity aside because this is hard and we have to do it. It's like, no, we're going to do it. It's hard. We're going to handle it emotionally. And that's where I think emotional intelligence is so important.
Totally. If you end up sacrificing relational value, you'll cut the soul out of the system. Okay. And then the whole point as a clinician and a philosopher, and somebody emphasizes wisdom, it's like, well, what the hell is the point then to have instrumental control in a soulless, empty system where people feel bitter and angry? It's like, forget it. Money isn't worth that. No. So we have to figure out what actually money is worth. Instrumental power is really good, but you sacrifice your soul for it, you're doomed. Trust me, I've worked with many therapy clients. I say, all right, you're high up here, but man, are you empty and bitter inside? It's like, yeah, I wouldn't trade for that.
Yeah, 100%. No, I love it. All right, so where's this green line going?
So then the green line, is the relationship between autonomy and dependency. All right, and this is essentially, so this is what this is mapping is, all right, I'm going to track myself other relation, and then the issue is how much engagement am I involved in? Okay, and the green line actually has a curvilinear relation. Meaning the middle is a healthy autonomy interdependent balance. Okay, that means I know who I am, I have some individuation, I also know I need to rely on other people, and I'm appreciative of what those boundaries are in those interrelations, and I know how to navigate them. Okay, the extremes are counterdependence. Counterdependence, like when you hear somebody say, F them, I don't need anybody else. That's immediately, for a clinician, you're like, yeah, the reason you don't is because you've been burned and you don't know how to relate to people and you're protecting yourself. So you're distancing yourself. And actually that's going to create what's called a dismissive attachment style. And you're going to be in trouble. Okay. Clinically, even you might be an efficient manager, but you're going to be clinically in trouble. Or you so need to be connected to other people and you're so worried about approval and need and everything else. And you can't tolerate the conflict and you're fused with them in a particular way that you'll then be driven into action for that connection in a way that is codependent. People use that term, okay, or have so much fear of being abandoned or rejected in a particular kind of way that they compensate. And so what this ultimately does is it sets up a frame now. I'm going to fill this in and say, this actually is your motivational state, okay? So a motivational state is the wants and drives and desires that you're trying to approach. And this sets up this try to approach. What happens, what you have then also are emotional energizing states, okay, that track changes in relation, okay? And what it is they embody a signal that says, hey, there's been a shift here, and now you want to note this, and you want to either like it or not like it, and then you want to orient your body, emote, meaning you're going to energize your motivation, your thoughts, your feelings, and your relational style in a particular direction. So when we experience high social influence, high relational value in its pure form, we'll experience joy, pleasure. When we imagine that, we'll orient it toward approach, okay? When we connect to other people, when we have that fusion and we get positive feedback, that's the experience, the embodied experience of love, and we want more of that. And we overestimate or we collapse love. Love is erotic love or eros. There's agape, love of care of others. There's also filiative love, meaning sort of your fellowship and friendship. The Greeks had a better frame for understanding the various components of love.
So
I have a question, or just that I find the autonomy and dependency line really, really interesting, that it seems like it's more, that's the one where we want to be in the center, whereas the other ones, well, it seems a little bit unique to me. And I'm thinking specifically from the perspective of, um, like, is it true that balancing those two then sets us up to have the positive aspects of love and power? I mean, how does the, how does
Yeah,
that balance of dependency and autonomy relate to that? And then I have a follow on too, because I think, anyway, but I would love to hear that first.
sure. Uh, yeah, so I mean, this is both the balance between power and love and the balance between autonomy and dependency are the two fundamental dialectics. If you manage those well, then you experience generally, it's a feedback loop. So what's happening to you is then how you feel about it, and then what skills you learn and everything else. So it's a developmental, it's not like, oh, I'll just place myself. It's like the world's happening to you. Sometimes some settings are a lot easier to be one way than the other. But what we see in individuals is that they get tracked into particular positions, okay, developmentally. So clinically and developmentally, people will, if you're successful in like an early family system, what will happen is you'll get set points around power, love, and autonomy and dependency that are balanced, and you'll have a secure attachment. That's when you will have a sense that you can find the proper safety and exploration with other people. That's called a secure attachment, and you have a default that actually will be able to make that. If you have an insecure attachment, okay, that means you're like, I need to be suspicious. And then what you'll have is you'll generally then go to a defensive mindset that's either dismissive, that's the counter-dependent extreme, and sort of hyper individualized and will screw other people, or the hyper-dependent extreme, which is, oh my gosh, I hope other people don't reject me. Okay. So these are, and we know these are very common trends that people will find themselves operating off of. Okay. So, so the point of it is that yes, the navigation to an attractor state that's sustainable is going to be generally found in both the balance of autonomy and dependency, a healthy autonomous interdependence, and an effective confidence of that, hey, I can achieve, I can go after what I want, and at the same time, I can be empathetic and connected to people. That's the ideal. And then what you see is many people split on that. They don't get the healthy polarized positives of each side. They get the shadow sides, and then they split and dichotomize, and then they're going to be relationally in trouble, both in their heart and in the actual interpersonal world.
One of the, one of the things that has emerged just really strongly from the work I've been doing with entrepreneurs in my own life, and then also with so many others, is actually our relationships of autonomy and dependency between ourselves and our companies. Yes. So there's, with so many entrepreneurs, there's a really challenging thing that usually goes towards the dependency side often. Yep. Well, it swings back and forth, but usually goes on dependency because often our identities get very wrapped up and entangled, and there's an unhealthy dependent attachment between who we are, who we think we are, and then what our companies are. And then that, that generally the pattern there, right, is swinging all the way in for a long time because we feel really dependent, and it's like all about that until we burn out or whatever else. Right. And then all of a sudden it's like, wow, I want nothing to do with this thing that I just invested, 4 years of my life in, and and what the hell am I supposed to do now, because I've built this whole thing around me. And so it's a really, that's actually just emerged as sort of a fundamental area of exploration of how do all these, so this is perfect, but like how do all these polarities and paradoxes actually relate to that for an entrepreneur, that fundamental relationship. Right. And obviously it extends beyond entrepreneurship with many people in their roles, but specifically with this group where it's like such an act of creation and love for what is being created. It's a very present thing. So I love that it's coming up.
Yeah, no, I'll finish the emotion and we'll come back to this. Okay, so we can narrow this. So we then have, you'll notice we actually have more negative emotions than we do positive emotions in many ways. We see the basic polar opposite of these. So hate relative to love, pride relative to shame, sadness, pain, fear as opposed to hope. Okay. Then interestingly, you have anger out here. Okay, which is your self-protective emotion. That's when your self-interests are challenged, and then you will activate anger. And then you have guilt, which orients you to potential transgressions and potentially making amends, and puts you in an other a self versus other orientation. Okay. And we see this a lot too. So I've worked at like counseling centers at universities. A lot of high achieving individuals come in. Oh my gosh, I got a B minus, but then I was annoyed, but I don't want to say anything. My roommates are taking advantage, but I really want to be kind and blah, blah, blah. In other words, they want to be both conscientious and caring. They're racked by guilt. They can't assert their anger. I've also worked in the big house. Okay, where it's like F you, everybody is this hyper masculine, toxic masculinity. Everything's super. Anybody who's like said something wrong about me, I'm gonna kick their ass. This is a very angry, self-oriented frame of reference. So you can really see big differences, in terms of what a self-ish culture looks like, an other-oriented culture. These are going to be extremes around hierarchy. Hostility, pride, anger will be big themes versus a communal concern, guilt, share, and worry about being given offense. So this is the basic map of the influence matrix, and what it shows is so your emotional, motivational, relational system is guiding, and then all of this manifests itself in our actual interpersonal behavioral exchanges. So now let's talk a little bit about what you were talking about in terms of the attachment that we have, like to our creations, okay, our ego attachments, all right, identity. So what we do is our whole developmental process is we're navigating that. We have actually basic trust versus mistrust. That's that whole attachment system. Then we learn whether we can be inferior, or we're going to be inferior, or we have industry and we can be accomplished. If we have a sort of a strong independent streak and a sense that we can come, do something unique, then we challenge authority, and then we start off on our own. But to start off on our own, we're going to want to have both intimacy and identity. Okay, so we're going to know who we are, and we're going to have intimacy, and then we should invest in something that starts to become us. Okay. Now, what happens to many people is that investment is an extension of who they are. Okay, it becomes their identity, and the extent to which they're loved or not, the extent to which it's successful or not, then translates into their own feedback about how they think about and feel about themselves. Well, that kind of identification is very complicated. Okay, very complicated. And people, because if you're successful, it will feed you so that you have to be more successful, but and then what are you going to do about that? Okay, if you get rejected and then you get rejected, well, that's pretty straightforward, right? And this idea of what I am and what this creation is, and the separation, the attachment, and the complexity and the conflict about that, well, that's going to be a long-standing navigating role.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I'm in it, we're all in it. And
right. I mean, listen, I built a unified theory, okay, trying to give to the field, and it's got my ego attachment and fusion with that, and the separate, am I my ideas? Am I worth what they like? What if they don't pay attention to me the way I thought they should? How bitter do I feel? What does it mean? Am I being narcissistic? I mean, all of those things, trust me. I feel it.
Yeah. And I think there's I think hopefully a follow-up I'd love to have that goes deeper on that particular topic.
Sure.
I think that is it's a self and other, I don't know where it is. We'll talk about what it falls on as far as trying to define it on a paradox level. But I think at the core, it's what we're aiming towards, right? At least at Paradox, is really who I am expresses itself in contribution to the thing I'm creating in a very aligned way that is truly who I want to be. Not always easy or comfortable, but like what is, my best form of myself, right? And then also where I think a lot of entrepreneurs, and probably all humans, specifically entrepreneurs, don't always have, is that coming back around of the creation. How is that giving to us, to me? How is what I'm creating enhancing my own life and my own growth outside of the ego, outside of the success, outside of the validation or the success or all of those things? But how is it actually giving me what I need to grow and become my best self, so that I can continue to then become a better human and more true to who I really am, and then have a new space to give back to it, as opposed to like I'm losing myself in this and now it's just one amorphous blob, and we all know how that goes. But yeah.
So one of the things, maybe a polarity we can come back to, is the attachment to becoming versus detachment and the capacity of being. Okay, so these are two fundamentally different modes. Okay, And the East, our Western mode is an achievement, especially a capitalist productive mode, is achievement. You know, you're like, okay, I'm going to achieve, then I'm going to get this, and I'm going to become who I can be. I'm going to be self-actualized. I'm always going to be pressing myself. And the value I get out of the world is in that position. That's better than what I was before, and that's how I'm going to position myself. Okay. So that's one. The Eastern traditions, especially like a Buddhist tradition, basically sees that as sickness. Okay. What they see is what the ego needs is it has desire. All right. It drives itself to insist that the world be a particular way. And then it tries to resist it when the world doesn't conform. And then much of suffering is trying to impose one's desires onto the world and the resistance and resentment that you get when that doesn't happen. So what did they figure out? They figured out that actually detachment from what needs to be and finding value in what has to be, my system has to be a success, or other people need to like me. They actually preach fundamentally a form of detachment. Okay. So what you'd have to, this is what I call the being becoming dialectic. Okay. And it's unbelievably key. And we don't teach it very well. People get all entangled in becoming and achievement. And we go through schools like, I better get an A, and I better do this, and I better get this, and I better beat my dad and slay him so that I'm somebody that matters. And then you're like, what really matters? You have existential crises, and you go all, and you have the dark night of the soul, and you just don't know what is. That's a very, very, long-standing welcome to human species kind of struggle.
Yeah, being and becoming. I love that. I want to, let's go deeper on that next time. We're just about at time, Gregg, but I want to make sure, everyone can, learn more about you and what you're doing. I know it's you're doing amazing work, both from, intellectually, but also you're getting a movement is underway as well. So, please send me some info on that I can share with the group.
Yep. I'll share my email so you can contact me. I founded a theory of knowledge society. It's really about how do we organize knowledge and channel it into wisdom. And then I built a system that potentially unifies knowledge in a particular way that allows us to be channeled toward wisdom. And that's what my pitch is for the 21st century.
Well, it's very, very needed. So very much appreciated. And where can people find out if they're just listening? Where can people find out where like a website or any other place?
Sure. You go to unifiedtheoryofknowledge.org. And that's where the homepage is. I just started a unified theory of knowledge medium. And if you want to email me, it's henriqgx@jmu.edu. And this is where you find me. This is my Zoomtopia world, and I'm on email and Zoom doing that these days. And so I'm happy to always talk about this vision and love to connect with people who are interested in making transformations in this direction.
Amazing, Gregg. Thank you. Well, really appreciate this time and all the other times we've gotten to connect, and very much looking forward to the next one.
Great, Mike. I love what you're doing. This kind of exploration and transformation is what the world needs, and I support it 100%, man.
Well, let's do it.
All righty. Fantastic.
Talk to you soon.
Yep. Take care.